What's up, Chiefs Kingdom? Noah Gray here, tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Josh's channel and check out showmefootball.com for more.
What is up, Chiefs Kingdom? Welcome back to another video on my channel. My name is Josh Fan of showmefootball.com and arrowheadaddict.com, and I had something that I really wanted to talk about today. I just wrote about this for Arrowhead Addict. It just came out this morning, and it's about Frank Clark possibly returning to the Kansas City Chiefs. I've made so many videos about Frank Clark over the years. Is he going to get cut? Is he going to stay? Frank Clark just got cut. Could he come back? And then here I am once again after the draft, after the fact that Frank Clark got released earlier this offseason, and the conversation has come up once again. Could Frank Clark return to the Kansas City Chiefs, or is it possible that they bring him back? And this idea has gained a lot of steam as Chiefs star defensive tackle Chris Jones has continuously tweeted about Frank Clark's return and how he wants it to happen. And he's been tweeting at the Chiefs every single day, bring back Frank Clark, bring back my dog Frank Clark, all this stuff. And he said he's going to tweet about it every day until it happens. And most Chiefs fans feel like it's a little bit of a no-brainer to bring back Frank Clark. And in an ideal world, yes, the Kansas City Chiefs would probably bring back Frank Clark. In fact, they wanted to keep him when they tried to restructure him before ultimately releasing him. The two sides just couldn't come to an agreement on the restructure. And so now here we are, post-draft. Frank Clark has remained unsigned, and usually this is the time of year or the time in the offseason where free agents that are still left unsigned, their prices tend to come back down a little bit. So Chiefs fans are saying, why not bring back Frank Clark on a minimum deal? The Chiefs need to do this. It's a no-brainer. He helped us win multiple Super Bowls. Bring back Frank Clark. I am here to say, and I'm sure most of you will not be shocked by this, that bringing back Frank Clark, one, isn't the greatest idea, and two, also isn't as simple as just bringing him back on a cheap one-year deal. There is actually quite a few hurdles that the Chiefs would have to clear to make a Frank Clark reunion even possible. So let's go into that. What are the odds that Frank Clark comes back to the Kansas City Chiefs? Could this happen? Let's talk about it. Let's just start with this, the financials, because when I wrote this article, this was one of the things that I got some pushback on that ultimately got me to make a video on this. So the Kansas City Chiefs and Frank Clark tried to restructure before they released him. They wanted to bring him back, but they were asking him to take a pay cut because the cap hit that he was due for next year was just utterly ridiculous for a player of his caliber, or a player that just, he wasn't worth the money, simply put. And so they couldn't come to an agreement. Frank Clark felt like he was worth more. He wasn't able to go to a low enough number that the Chiefs were willing to pay. So the Chiefs released him. Because of that, the Chiefs owe Frank Clark $7 million in dead cap. So even with Frank Clark not being on the team right now, he is being paid $7 million. So I got some pushback on this because people were saying, oh, well, it's sunk cost fallacy. The $7 million you're paying him doesn't matter because it's going to be due either way. If the Chiefs want to bring him back now, the $7 million they're already paying him doesn't change anything. That is false, and here's why. So first of all, I'm not even saying... So technically, those people that are saying that are right. He's due $7 million no matter what, whether or not he's on the team. So if they want to bring him back, the $7 million that they're paying him alone won't keep him off the team. Yes, that is true. But that doesn't mean the Chiefs also want to hand out a new contract to a guy that they're already paying to not be on the team because he refused to take a pay cut earlier this offseason. It would ultimately defeat the purpose of releasing him, quite honestly. The only scenario in which it works out is if Frank Clark decides to come back on a very cheap veteran minimum deal, which we'll talk about that in a minute. But back to the $7 million thing. It also affects negotiations because the Chiefs are probably saying to Frank Clark right now, look, we're already paying you $7 million. So we're not going to be paying you that much. And Frank Clark is saying, well, I'm worth a little bit more than that. I'm worth more than $7 million. You can't replace me. He said that. I mean, you go look at Frank Clark's Twitter. He was tweeting about how no one can replace him and how important he is to the Chiefs, basically. So with that in mind, one could reasonably assume that Frank, because here's the thing, too. Everyone in my mentions is saying you can bring back Frank Clark for the minimum. If you just look at what happened when the Chiefs released him, what led up to that and the way that Frank Clark talks about himself, everyone is just assuming that Frank Clark is going to agree to taking a pay cut or to taking the veterans minimum. Now, that said, since the draft is passed, maybe his price came down a little bit. Maybe his market isn't quite what he hoped it was. But it's still not impossible that a team like the Chicago Bears swoops in and pays Frank Clark, I don't know, $5 million, which is a hell of a lot more than the Chiefs can pay him. Because here's the reality right now. The Chiefs have $2.4 million in cap space, according to overthecap.com and spottrack.com. That ranks about 30th in the league. That's barely enough to sign their draft class, which they haven't done yet. They have not completed signing their rookie draft class. And whenever they do that, even signing Frank Clark to a veteran minimum deal would be a financial reach. The Chiefs just can't offer him very much, and part of the reason for that is because they're paying him $7 million already in dead cap. I mean, if I'm the Chiefs, I'll be telling Frank Clark, sure, you can come and play for us if it's for free, since we're already paying you technically. But, of course, Frank Clark would never actually agree to do that. If another team is offering Frank Clark even $3 million, $4 million, which I could totally see happening, because, again, it's not impossible that a team swoops in and does that. I mean, look at Jadeveon Clowney, for example. The dude has made a living from waiting to sign with a team until June every single offseason, and every contract he's signed has ended up being double-digit $1 million. So it's not impossible that Frank Clark gets a decent contract from another team that is desperate after not filling the need in the draft, and they want an edge that can bring to the table what Frank Clark can, and maybe they don't have that. So that's the financial hurdle to signing Frank Clark or bringing Frank Clark back, and why it's not so simple. Then let's talk about the roster situation. The Chiefs made a lot of investments in the edge position actually this offseason. They signed Charles Omenihu to a 2-year, $20 million deal. They spent a first-round pick on Felix Anudike-Uzomah. They spent another pick on B.J. Thompson in the 5th round. George Karlaftis is going to be taking on a bigger role in his second year, we think. Frank Clark is a guy that strikes me as someone who, because let's agree on this. All Chiefs fans would agree that Frank Clark would be best suited in a rotational edge role. But again, everyone is just assuming that Frank Clark would be okay with that. You look at Frank Clark's last 4 seasons in Kansas City. He's averaged in 4 seasons playing 72% of the team's defensive snaps. That is a significant number. Is Frank Clark going to agree to come back to the Chiefs playing on a very reduced role? Because at some point you have to let the young guys come up. You have to give the young guys their opportunity. You can't just keep bringing back Frank Clark and having him create this logjam at the defensive end position. When the Chiefs signed Charles Omenihu, to me that kind of felt like the Frank Clark replacement. So then if you're bringing back Frank Clark, then it kind of, where does he fit? Because Frank Clark, again, does not strike me as a guy that's going to sign up for a rotational role. I think he thinks more of himself. I think he still thinks he's a top edge defender in this league. Just look at the way he tweets, look at the way he talks about himself. I just think he has a lot of self-confidence, and that's not a bad thing. But everyone is assuming that he would sign up for a rotational role when we don't know that as a matter of fact. And to be clear, I don't think bringing in a veteran edge is a bad idea, and Frank Clark would be a good candidate as a veteran edge if the Chiefs choose to do that. But I don't know if Clark is looking to be in a rotational role. Then you're kind of more looking at like a Carlos Dunlap or a Melvin Ingram as a guy that you could bring in as a veteran end. But that's a whole nother conversation. Frank Clark could also be offered a bigger role by another team. So not only can the Chiefs not offer him that much money as things currently stand, they would have to do some sort of roster move to free up some money. Because, I mean, I had someone earlier today say you can convert Mahomes' contract. The Chiefs already did that. The deadline to do that has passed, and they already converted some money, and they used it. I don't know when they're able to do it again, but it's very hard, regardless, to see the Chiefs double dipping in Mahomes' contract. I don't think they want to do that. So they would have to do some significant roster move to free up money to even offer Frank Clark a decent deal. And then on top of it, there's other teams out there like the Chicago Bears, an example I made earlier, that can offer him a bigger role along with more money. But my main point is that with the investments that you've made into the edge position, you simply cannot bring Frank Clark to play 72% of the team's defensive snaps. You just can't. You've made too many investments in other guys, and they need to get their opportunity and they need to develop. And me personally, I am just moved on from Frank Clark. Like, I want to see what the young guys can do. I want to see those guys get the majority of the snaps. I'm excited for Charles Omenihu, and I don't know where Frank Clark fits in that rotation if you're to bring him back. And then there's also Mike Dana, who I didn't even mention, who's become a really solid player and can do a lot of what Frank Clark can do. So, all in all, in an ideal world, Frank Clark makes sense for Kansas City as a veteran rotational edge. Problem is, we don't know if Frank Clark wants to do that. The Chiefs can't offer Frank Clark that much money. And the $7 million in dead cap that they're already paying him does matter, and it does factor into negotiations, even if you want to call it a sunk cost fallacy. So, with all that being said, guys, those are my thoughts on the possibility of the Chiefs bringing back Frank Clark. But I want to hear from you guys. Are you interested in bringing back Frank Clark? Do you want to see it happen? Do you think it happens? Let me know down in the comments. But make sure you guys also like, share, and subscribe so more Chiefs fans can find this. And make sure you check out my work on showmefootball.com and arrowheadaddict.com. And I will see you all in the next one. Go Chiefs!